There are encounters that lasts only a few minutes, but enough to change an entire life. That night, he had only planned to go to the restaurant for a free meal, a foolish joke from his best friend. And she, the daughter of a billion-dollar empire, had decided to try loving once without carrying her last name with her. They were not supposed to meet. They did not belong to the same world. And it all began because of a mistaken table. If that evening he had sat in the right seat, if she hadn't smiled and said, "Would you like to stay?" then perhaps there would be no story at all. A love story that does not see status. And about the moment a poor man stood up when the entire room fell silent. Chicago at night has always known how to make people feel small. Glass buildings reflected the lights like artificial stars, and the streets still murmured with traffic even as the clock edged toward 8 in the evening. On the rooftop of a luxury restaurant overlooking the skyline, the soft clink of glasses and the gentle notes of jazz blended like music written for those accustomed to living in the glow of the tension. That night, Ethan Cole stepped into that space with an indescribable sense of displacement. He was 29 years old, a mechanic from the South Side. His hands were more familiar with a wrench than with a long-stemmed wine glass. The white shirt he wore was the only one in his closet without oil stains. He had ironed it twice, though a faint crease still lingered at the cuff. His leather shoes had been carefully polished, but if you looked closely, you could still see the scuffs from days spent standing for hours in the garage. Ethan did not belong here, and he knew it. In his jacket pocket was his phone, open to the reservation message, a gift from Marcus, his best friend, who had signed him up for a dating app as a joke. Marcus had said, "Just go. Think of it as a free dinner. Who knows, you might meet someone interesting." Ethan didn't believe in blind online dates. He believed in the smell of gasoline, the roar of engines starting, and things you could actually touch. But tonight, he came anyway. "Table 12, sir." The hostess smiled professionally. Ethan took a deep breath before walking past rows of tables draped in pristine white linen, where low conversations and quiet laughter created a world far removed from the noisy garage he was used to. And then he saw her. Olivia Harrington, 27 years old, sitting alone at a table by the glass railing. The Chicago sky behind her was painted in sunset hues. Warm, golden light fell over her light brown hair, outlining the soft strands like a halo. She wore a pastel blue dress, simple yet refined, the kind of simplicity only someone who truly understands luxury knows how to choose. Her wheelchair was modern, sleek, and almost blended seamlessly into the elegant surroundings. She did not try to hide it. But she did not allow it to become the center of attention either. Ethan paused for a moment, not because of the wheelchair, but because of her eyes. They were not fragile, not guarded. There was only the faintest trace of anticipation. He stepped closer. "Table 12?" he asked, his voice low but slightly cautious. Olivia looked up. Their eyes met. "Yes," she smiled. "I believe so." Neither of them asked further questions. They did not confirm names. They did not cross-check profiles. Because the dating app had been designed for anonymity. No photos, no detailed information. Just two people meeting in a predetermined place. Ethan pulled out the chair and sat down. And in that moment, they both believed the person across from them was the one they had been waiting for. The first few minutes are always the hardest. But strangely enough, that night the awkwardness lasted only a few seconds. Ethan talked about summer evenings in Chicago, when the entire neighborhood would open fire hydrants so children could run through the cool streams of water. Olivia laughed and said she had only known Chicago through conference rooms on high floors. He said he hated snow because it made it hard to start engines. She said she had once loved snow so much that she flew to Aspen every winter. until one curve in the road changed everything. Ethan did not ask for details. He simply listened. She did not ask how much he earned each month. She only asked, "What scent do you like most?" Ethan thought for a moment. Black coffee early in the morning, and the smell of rain after a hot day. Olivia nodded. "I like the smell of new paper in an unwritten notebook." They talked about small things, about how Chicago has the best hot dogs in the world, about whether Bruce Springsteen is still relevant, about whether one should believe in the concept of fate. And the strangest thing was, no one mentioned money. No one mentioned status. For those 25 minutes, there was no Harrington Global, no South Side garage, just two people laughing because the fork was too small for the steak. Olivia realized it had been a long time since she had laughed so naturally. Not the polite smile at fundraising galas, not the smile trained to hold at a 30-degree angle before cameras, but the kind of smile that made the corners of her eyes crease slightly. Ethan realized he no longer felt out of place. He forgot he was in a restaurant where a dinner cost half a month's rent. He only knew that the woman sitting across from him was listening, truly listening. But life rarely allows something beautiful to last too long without testing it. Behind Ethan, a figure approached, tall, composed, confident. And in that moment, when an unfamiliar voice sounded from behind, their story began to turn in an entirely different direction. "I'm sorry, are you Olivia?" The voice cut through the conversation like a thin but sharpened blade. Ethan turned around. The man standing behind him was slightly taller, his tailored suit fitting perfectly against his frame, his tie knotted with millimeter precision. The faint scent of expensive cologne lingered in the air, the unmistakable fragrance of someone accustomed to glass-walled boardrooms and business-class flights. Olivia looked up. The smile was still on her lips, but something in her eyes subtly shifted. "Yes, I'm Olivia." The man hesitated slightly as his gaze dropped, not to her face, but to the wheelchair. The moment lasted only a second, but it was enough to change everything. "Oh." A short laugh escaped him, not quite polite. "I didn't realize this." The sentence was unfinished, but the meaning was unmistakable. The jazz music seemed to soften. Two nearby tables fell silent. A server subtly turned her head. Olivia felt that familiar sensation, the look of pity mixed with discomfort, as though her presence were a missing detail in a description. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," the man continued, lowering his voice, though still loud enough for those around to hear. "The profile didn't mention this." Ethan felt his body tense, not out of anger, but because he saw something in Olivia's eyes, a very slight, rapid withdrawal, as though she had just raised an invisible wall. She was far too familiar with this. The canceled dates, the messages were never answered, the men who believed she should have said something beforehand. This. Those two short words suddenly became her entire identity in someone else's eyes. Ethan slowly stood up. He did not slam the table. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. The man looked at him and frowned. "Sorry, and you are?" Ethan did not answer that question. He only took a small step, just enough to position himself between Olivia and the other man. "She's not alone." His voice was not loud, but every word was clear, like a declaration. The entire room fell silent. No one spoke, but everyone understood. The man let out a scoff. "I believe there's been a mistake. I booked a table for a different date." Olivia took a slow breath. "Perhaps that's true." Ethan turned to her. His eyes did not ask, "Are you okay?" Because sometimes that question carries pity. He only asked softly, "Would you like to stay?" Olivia looked at him. There was no pity in his eyes, no curiosity, no question of why. Only respect. The other man shook his head, muttered something under his breath, the word ridiculous audible enough, and turned away. The sound of leather shoes echoed across the wooden floor. The elevator doors opened and closed. A few whispers rose, then quickly faded as though nothing had happened. But for Olivia, everything had already happened. She had prepared herself to be rejected. She had even told herself she would smile, remain polite, and say, "Have a good evening." But what she had not prepared for was someone standing up, not for her name, not for her money, not to prove anything, simply because she did not deserve to be treated like a technical error in a profile. Ethan sat back down. The air still felt slightly heavy. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I guess I really did sit at the wrong table." Olivia looked at him, then unexpectedly laughed, a light but genuine sound. "Maybe you chose the wrong table," she said, "but you chose the right person." Ethan paused slightly. For the first time since entering the restaurant, he no longer felt like the most out-of-place person in the room. "Do you want to leave?" he asked. Olivia glanced around, the crystal glasses, the golden lighting, the lingering, curious looks. "Very much," she replied. Ethan stood and gently pulled her chair back. Not rushed, not awkward. He did it as though it were the most natural thing in the world. As they passed the reception desk, a few eyes followed them. Some recognized Olivia. The Harrington name was not easily forgotten in Chicago. But tonight, she was not Harrington. She was simply Olivia, a woman who had just been protected most simply. The glass doors opened. The night air rushed in, calm and clear. Below them, Chicago remained lit as though no uncomfortable moment had ever taken place. Ethan slowed his steps to walk beside her. "There's a grilled cheese truck nearby," he said, his voice slightly hesitant. "Not fancy, but good." Olivia tilted her head and looked at him. "That sounds perfect." And as they walked away, leaving behind the luxury restaurant and table 12, neither of them yet knew that the earlier mistake had not been an accident, but the beginning of something greater than destiny. Because there are moments that seem minor, a man standing up, a simple sentence, yet powerful enough to change the way a heart sees the world. They left behind the luxurious golden lights and the clinking of crystal glasses, stepping down onto the city's real ground, where the night wind carried the scent of exhaust fumes, pizza from the street corner, and the distant echo of a train horn. Chicago no longer looked glamorous, but it felt real. Ethan led Olivia to a small food truck in Logan Square, the kind with a handwritten sign that read, "Best grilled cheese in town." Not advertising, just simple confidence. He leaned down to the service window and ordered 2 grilled cheese sandwiches and 2 cups of hot tomato soup. Then he added, "Make the edges extra crispy, please." Olivia watched him and smiled faintly. "You seem to trust this place a lot." Ethan shrugged. "Here they remember my name. In places like that restaurant, they probably remember the credit card more." There was no bitterness in his voice, just truth. They sat down on a wooden bench in front of a small park. A street lamp cast a warm glow. Steam rose from the soup, curling into the cool night air. Olivia took a bite of her sandwich. The cheese melted perfectly, crisp on the outside. She closed her eyes for a second. "It's really good." Ethan laughed. "Told you." No white tablecloths anymore, no scrutinizing stares, Just two people sitting side by side, more genuine than ever. After a while, Olivia asked softly, "Did you ever think about where you'd be at this age?" Ethan looked up at the sky where a few faint stars pushed through the city lights. "I wanted to study art," he said slowly. "Drawing, sketching. I liked drawing things in motion, cars, pedestrians, moments no one notices." "Then why didn't you pursue it?" He was silent for a few seconds. "My dad died when I was 12. Cancer. My mom worked night shifts as a nurse. My little sister was only 7. He gave a slight shrug. Someone had to stay home. Someone had to fix what was broken. Olivia looked at his hands, the calluses impossible to hide, no matter how clean he had washed them. "You grew up too fast." Ethan smiled, though a quiet layer of memory lingered in his eyes. "Maybe. But my sister just graduated from college, full scholarship. I think that's enough." Olivia didn't say anything more. She simply nodded softly. Then it was her turn. 3 years earlier in Aspen, during what was supposed to be a perfect vacation. Heavy snowfall, white slopes, a sharp curve, a moment of lost control. "My lower spine was completely damaged," she said lightly, as though discussing the weather. "The doctors said I was lucky to be alive." Ethan didn't interrupt, didn't interject. "There are days," she continued, her eyes fixed on the steam rising from her cup, "when I'm not sure I agree with the word lucky." The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was respect. Finally, Ethan spoke quietly. "I'm sure." She looked up. "I'm sure you're lucky," repeated, "because if you weren't, I wouldn't be sitting here." No flourish, no melodrama, just that. The night breeze gently blew a strand of hair across Olivia's forehead. She reached to brush it away, but her soda cup beside her shifted slightly. The lid popped off. A little liquid spilled onto her hand and dress. "Oh," she murmured. In the past, situations like that were always followed by awkward looks, rushed hands, overly flustered, "let me help" reactions. But Ethan calmly pulled a neatly folded small handkerchief from his jacket pocket. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He gently wiped the droplets from her hand, each movement careful, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "All good," he said. Olivia looked at him. Not because he wiped her hand, but because of the way he did it. No pity, no exaggeration, no attempt to play the hero, just ordinary care between two human beings. "Doesn't it bother you?" she asked softly. Ethan paused for a brief second, then looked directly into her eyes. "I wiped your hand because it's beautiful," he said slowly, "not because I feel sorry for you." The sentence was not loud, but it touched something very deep inside Olivia. For 3 years, people had looked at her with sympathy, caution, or excessive effort to pretend they didn't notice. But no one had said that something about her was beautiful. She smiled softly, this time without defense, without hesitation, just a genuine smile. They sat there a while longer, speaking little. The city around them kept moving, but in that small corner, time seemed to slow down. When they finally stood to leave, Ethan said, "I don't know what tomorrow looks like, but tonight, I'm really glad I sat at the wrong table." Olivia looked at him, her eyes shimmering under the streetlight. "So am I." Neither of them yet knew that their worlds would not allow peace to last for long. But in that moment, in a small park with the scent of grilled cheese still lingering in the air, something important had been planted. Not a blazing love, but trust. And sometimes, that is the hardest thing in the world to find. Some relationships grow quietly. like a small branch pushing up through a crack in stone. And then there are forces powerful enough to crush it, with nothing more than a headline. 3 weeks after that night at the grilled cheese truck, everything had unfolded gently. Ethan and Olivia did not rush to name whatever it was between them. They met in ordinary places. A 24/7 diner heavy with the smell of strong coffee. Ethan's garage, where soft country music played beneath the hiss of an air compressor. The small park where they had once shared dinner. Olivia liked watching Ethan work. He would bend over an old car, his hands stained with oil, yet his movements were as fluid as an artist's. She had drawn him once, changing a tire in the rain, golden light falling across his broad shoulders, his face focused but gentle. "No one's ever drawn me before," he said when he saw the sketch. "I just wanted you to see what I see," she replied. She did not add that in a world filled with people who only looked at shares, balance sheets, and profit margins, he was the only one who saw her as a human being. But the world does not favor simple stories. One afternoon, while Olivia was at her apartment in Chicago, her phone began vibrating non-stop. Messages, notifications, missed calls. She opened a link. The photo was slightly blurred, taken from a distance. She was laughing outside Ethan's garage. His hand rested lightly behind the back of her wheelchair. The headline beneath it read, "Harrington heiress dating Southside mechanic?" Below it were sentences half speculative, half mocking. A modern fairy tale or a passing amusement? Can class divisions truly be erased by emotion? Olivia felt her stomach tighten. She was not surprised by the press. The Harrington name had never enjoyed the privilege of privacy, but she had not expected them to dig into Ethan. She knew what that meant. Not just rumors, but investigation. At the same time, in Manhattan, in a high-rise office overlooking the Hudson River, Richard Harrington set the newspaper down on his desk. He did not react with the anger people might imagine. He did not slam his fist. He did not shout. He simply removed his glasses, placed them carefully on the oak surface, and said quietly, "Get me his file." For Richard Harrington, the world operated on information. Every decision was built on data, and Ethan Cole, in his eyes, was merely data to be analyzed. The following afternoon, Olivia was asked to fly back to New York. Her father's office was unchanged, classical paintings on the walls, marble floors, warm golden lighting that somehow still felt cold. "Would you like to explain?" he asked, holding up the newspaper. "There's nothing to explain," Olivia replied calmly. "I'm seeing someone I care about." Richard looked at his daughter. His expression was not anger, but disappointment. "You are the public face of this corporation. You cannot be careless." "Careless?" Her voice trembled slightly, but it was not weak. "I met someone kind." "Kind is not enough," he said plainly. "Marriage is part of the strategy. You understand that." Olivia fell silent. 3 years earlier, after the accident, her father had been there, signing documents, hiring the best doctors, paying for the most expensive rehabilitation centers. He loved her, in his own way. But that love always came with control. "I am not a merger," she said softly but clearly. Richard did not answer immediately. He opened the file that had just been delivered. Ethan Cole, 29 years old, owner of a small garage. No criminal record, average income, no significant assets, no shares, no strategic vision. He looked up. "What do you think he's with you for?" Olivia gripped the armrests of her wheelchair tightly. "For me." Richard shook his head slightly. "You are too naive." Meanwhile, in Chicago, a black sedan pulled up in front of Ethan's garage after closing hours. The man who stepped out was not large, but he carried a cold presence. "I represent Mr. Harrington." Ethan wiped his hands with a rag and looked him straight in the eye. "Figured." The man took a step inside. "You are a hard-working individual. That's admirable. It would be unfortunate if a surprise inspection delayed your business license." It was not a direct threat, just a reminder. "You should consider stepping away," he added, "for her sake." The garage door closed. The sound of the sedan's engine faded into the distance. Ethan stood still for a long time. He was not afraid of losing money, not afraid of starting over, but he understood what power could do. His phone lit up. Olivia. He looked at the screen, then turned it off. That night, he sat alone in the dark garage and wrote a small note. "I can't walk beside you if it brings you harm, but I will always stay behind you, close enough to catch you if you fall." He knew he was doing the hardest thing, leaving not because he loved less, but because he loved too much. And on the other side of the country, Olivia did not yet know that the real storm had only just begun. At first, Olivia thought Ethan was simply busy. His garage was never truly quiet. There were days he worked until late at night, his phone left in a corner of the workbench, the air compressor's sound drowning out every notification. But when the 5th call went unanswered, when the 8th message showed only a cold "delivered," she began to feel that something was wrong. "Are you okay? Can we talk? I'm sorry if that night I made things awkward." No reply. Her Chicago apartment suddenly felt larger and emptier than usual. The framed artwork on the walls, the bookshelves, the decorative pieces that once made her feel independent and free, now reflected a loneliness she could hardly name. She had grown used to losing many things after the accident: the ability to go for morning runs, the freedom of climbing stairs, and spontaneous trips without planning. But this was different. This was not losing an ability. It was losing a person. On the 3rd night, without hearing from him, Olivia sat by the window looking down at the stream of cars below. Red and amber lights reflected against the glass like distant heartbeats. She wondered, had she been wrong to suggest they keep some distance for a while? In that moment of weakness, had she accidentally pushed him away for good? She remembered the evening at the diner. "Maybe we should slow down," she had said, trying to sound composed. She thought she was protecting him from her father's anger, but in Ethan's eyes at that moment, something had cracked. He didn't blame her. He had only asked, "Are you still you?" She hadn't answered, and now that silence returned like a mirror reflecting herself at her. On the 5th day, an envelope with no sender's name was placed in Olivia's apartment mailbox. The handwriting was familiar. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. "I can't walk beside you, Charlotte, but I will always stay behind you, like a shadow, keeping you steady. This is not goodbye, just my way of protecting you. Ethan." Protecting. She stared at that word. 3 years ago, people had said they wanted to protect her too. They cleared paths for her. They decided for her. They arranged her life so she would be safe. But no one had asked whether she wanted to be protected that way. The envelope slipped from her hand and fell to the floor. "No," she whispered. The tears came unexpectedly. Not loud, just quietly spilling over like a river breaking its banks. She did not want to be kept behind. She did not want to be the reason someone sacrificed his future. She just wanted to be loved as an equal. That night, rain fell without warning. Chicago sank beneath a thick curtain of water. Olivia did not call a driver. She did not bring an umbrella. She pushed herself out of the apartment, the wheels rolling over soaked pavement, droplets splashing onto her dress. She did not know where she was going, only that but she could not stay still another minute. The pedestrian bridge near the Chicago River appeared through the rain. It was where she used to walk with her mother as a child, where her mother once said, "One day you'll cross this bridge on your own." That dream had ended the night of the accident. And now, beneath the heavy downpour, Olivia only wanted to prove to herself that she could still move forward, even if in a different way. She pushed up the bridge's incline. The wheels slipped slightly on the wet wood. Halfway across, a soft clack echoed. The front wheel jammed into a gap between the planks. She pulled hard. It wouldn't budge. The rain poured down harder. Headlights flared in the distance, cutting through the sheets of water. A delivery truck was approaching from the other side of the bridge, its speed not slowing. "Stop!" she shouted, but the rain swallowed her voice. She pulled again. The wheel remained stuck. In one brief moment, she thought of everything that had happened. Table 12, the grilled cheese sandwich, the sketch in the garage, the letter. And a cold fear crept into her chest. Not fear of dying, but fear that everything would end before she had the chance to say what she needed to say. Suddenly, through the roar of rain and engine noise, a voice rang out, hoarse and urgent. "Olivia!" She turned. A figure ran through the downpour. Ethan. His shoe slipped once on the slick bridge, but he caught his balance and lunged forward. "I'm not ready to lose you again," he shouted. He grabbed the handles behind her chair, putting all his strength into a sharp pull. The wheel jerked free from the gap. Only seconds before the truck roared past, water was spraying wildly. They both fell onto the cold, wet surface of the bridge. Ethan wrapped his arms tightly around her, his body shielding her from the hardwood beneath. The truck's sound faded into the distance. Only the rain and their ragged breathing remained. Olivia clutched his shirt tightly. "I thought you'd really left," she choked out. Ethan closed his eyes for a second. "I tried," he admitted. "I thought walking away would protect you." She shook her head. "I don't need protection from the world," she said through her sobs. "I need you to stay." The rain kept falling, but this time, in the middle of the storm, there was no distance. Only two soaked, trembling people, no longer silent. And sometimes, the moment when everything seems about to be lost, this is precisely where people decide not to let go anymore. The rain that night seemed to wash away every remaining distance between them. The next morning, the Chicago sky was apparent. The river lay still, as if it had never witnessed the life and death moment just hours before. But inside Olivia, everything had changed. She was no longer afraid of her father, no longer afraid of the press, no longer afraid of having to choose. She feared only one thing: losing the man who had been willing to run through a storm to save her. Ethan sat across from her in a small cafe near the garage. There were still a few scratches on his hands from their fall on the bridge. She looked at them as though they were living proof of a decision. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. Ethan met her gaze without looking away. "I know." He paused. "I did it because I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I had stayed." It wasn't a grand declaration, but it was honest enough to make her heart tighten. Olivia took a deep breath. "I'm going to talk to my father." Ethan was silent for a few seconds. "I don't want you to give up everything because of me." She shook her head gently. "I'm not giving things up for you. I'm doing it because I don't want to live a life arranged by someone else anymore." It was the first time in 3 years since the accident that she truly felt she was standing on her own 2 feet. Richard Harrington's office in Manhattan remained wrapped in its familiar silence. Light streamed through the tall windows, touching the expensive oak desk. Olivia entered without asking the assistant to announce her. "I've made my decision," she said, her voice steady. Richard looked up. He studied his daughter longer than usual, as if searching for signs of impulsiveness. "I will continue seeing Ethan," she continued. "If that makes shareholders uncomfortable, if that fuels the press, I accept it." "You don't understand the consequences," he replied in a low tone. "A reputation built over a lifetime can collapse because of one emotional decision." Olivia tightened her grip on the wheelchair's armrests. "I lost the ability to walk in one night," she said slowly. "I know what collapse feels like." The air in the room grew heavy. Richard stood and walked around his desk. Tall, imposing, a man the financial world treated with caution. But in this moment he was simply a father. "What do you think he loves you for?" he asked. "For me," she answered. He held her gaze for a long moment. "What does he offer you? No network, no power, no security." Olivia smiled faintly. "He offers me the feeling that I don't have to prove I deserve to exist." For the first time, Richard did not respond immediately. He glanced at the wheelchair, something he had once considered a vulnerability to shield from the public eye, and he realized his daughter no longer wanted it hidden. "Are you prepared to leave the company?" he asked. Olivia nodded. "If necessary." There was no defiance in her voice, only truth, a truth that left the room silent. That afternoon, Ethan walked into the Harrington office building. No expensive suit, no attempt to look like he belonged there, just a clean shirt, straight shoulders, and a steady gaze. He stood before Richard Harrington, the man who could make his livelihood disappear with a single phone call. "You don't have to like me," Ethan said first, "and I'm not here to ask for permission." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you here?" "To say that I don't need your money. I don't need your name." Ethan glanced at Olivia, then back. "I just need her to know I will never make her feel like a burden." That calmness was not recklessness. It was courage. Richard looked at the young man before him. He saw the calloused hands, the eyes that did not lower. "You think that's love?" he asked. Ethan nodded. "I don't know any other way." The room fell into a long silence. Finally, Richard turned away and walked back to his desk. He did not say, "I agree." He did not say, "I accept." He said only one sentence: "Don't make her regret it." Ethan answered without hesitation, "Never." When they stepped out of the building, the New York wind cut sharply between the skyscrapers. Olivia took Ethan's hand. "Are you scared?" she asked. Ethan gave a small smile. "Yes, but I'm more afraid of losing you." She squeezed his hand tighter. Sometimes, freedom does not come from defeating others. It comes from daring to stand on your own side. And that day, in loud and ambitious Manhattan, a young woman chose love. Not because it was easy, but because it was real. 6 months after that morning in Manhattan, the backyard of Ethan's garage looked completely different. The space that had once been piled with old tires, rusted toolboxes, and oil-soaked scraps of metal had been cleared. Small strands of yellow lights were strung from the tin roof to the wooden fence. A long wooden table stood in the center of the yard, covered with a simple white cloth. Wildflowers arranged in recycled glass bottles reflected the late afternoon sunlight. There was no five-star wedding hall, no orchestra, no guest list of hundreds, just friends from the neighborhood, the mechanics who worked alongside Ethan, a few of Olivia's former college colleagues, and a handful of neatly dressed figures from the Harrington office, standing slightly out of place amid the scent of grilled meat and the sound of unfiltered laughter. Ethan stood beneath a wooden canopy he had built himself. His suit was not custom-tailored in Italy, just one that fit correctly, carefully pressed. His tie was slightly crooked, just as Olivia used to tease him whenever he tied it too quickly. His his hands clasped together, then released. He had faced broken engines on highways. He had repaired cars that others believed were beyond saving, but nothing had made his heart race like this moment. Music began to play. Not an elaborate symphony, just a soft acoustic melody, the warm sound of a guitar like a quiet story being told. Everyone stood. And then, from behind the garage, Olivia appeared. Not in a wheelchair. No one gasped, no one dared to speak. She wore a white satin wedding dress, simple in design, without glittering stones. Her hair was loosely braided, a few strands falling naturally around her face. In her hands, a silver metal walking frame. One step. Slow. Clear. The entire space seemed to hold its breath. Ethan couldn't stop the tears. Not from surprise. He knew she had been training for months. He had seen the days she fell in therapy, seen her grit her teeth when her muscles trembled with pain. But watching her walk toward him was something else. Not a miracle, not a full recovery, just effort and faith. Every step she took was a silent declaration. I am not defined by what I lost. As she came closer, Ethan took one small step forward, just enough that if she faltered, he could catch her. But he did not touch her, because he knew she wanted to walk that distance herself. When only a few steps remained, she paused and looked up at him. There was no fear in her eyes, only a gentle pride. I told you, she whispered when she reached him. I would walk to you myself. Ethan smiled through his tears. And I will always wait, right here. They held hands, not because she needed him to stand steady, but because they chose to stand beside each other. The ceremony was not long. There were no grand, flowery speeches, just two people saying the truest things they knew. Olivia promised she would not let difficult days make her forget why they began. Ethan promised he would never take her strength for granted. I can't fix the car that hurt you, he said in his vow, his voice breaking. But I promise to hold the broken pieces in your heart so they never hurt you again. There was no polite applause, only cheers, whistles, laughter, and tears that were not hidden. When the kiss ended, people began moving toward the table. Only one man remained still. Richard Harrington. He was still wearing his expensive suit, his tie perfectly straight, but his eyes were no longer as cold as the first time he met Ethan. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then walked toward him. Richard looked at his daughter, laughing among friends, not in a boardroom, not beneath the flash of reporters' cameras. Just laughing. Richard placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Not heavily, but firmly enough. Take care of her, he said. Not congratulations, not an apology, but acknowledgement. Ethan nodded. I will. Nothing more needed to be said. As the sun slowly set behind the garage roof, golden orange light washed over the small backyard with a warmth that was not expensive but complete. Olivia rested her head on Ethan's shoulder. Did you ever think a wrong table could lead to all this? She asked softly. Ethan looked up at the twinkling string lights above them. I think, he said slowly, life doesn't always give us what we reserve. But sometimes it gives us what we truly need. Olivia squeezed his hand. Some love stories begin with perfection, and some begin with a mistake. But when two people dare to move toward each other, whether on their own feet or with every ounce of courage they have left, it is no longer a mistake. It is a choice. And they chose. The wedding ended in laughter, tight tight embraces, and the lingering scent of cake frosting on jacket sleeves. But for Olivia and Ethan, the story did not end with vows beneath golden string lights. 2 days later, they left Chicago. No private jet, no luxury yacht, just a commercial flight to California, where the ocean stretches wide and the sky seems endless. Santa Monica welcomed them with pale afternoon sunlight. The ocean breeze swept across the wooden boardwalk, carrying the scent of salt and the steady rhythm of waves like an eternal soundtrack. Olivia stood on the boardwalk, gazing out at the vast ocean before her. 3 years ago, she had believed her life was divided into 2 parts, before the accident and after the accident. But today, she began to understand. Perhaps there was a 3rd part. After daring to love. Ethan stood beside her, saying nothing. He knew some moments did not require words. "Are you sure?" he asked gently when she glanced down at her legs. Olivia nodded softly. "I've been waiting for this moment for 3 years." He helped her step down from the wooden path. He did not lift her. He did not pull her forward. He simply placed his hand beneath hers, a point of balance, not a life preserver. Her bare feet touched the sand, cool, soft, real. Olivia inhaled quietly as if her body were relearning a language it had once forgotten. "I'm standing," she whispered. Not perfectly steady, not without assistance, but standing. She took a small step. The sand shifted beneath her feet and she wavered slightly. Ethan tightened his hand just a little, but not too much. Because he understood, she did not need to be held in place. She needed to be trusted. The waves rolled in, brushing gently against her ankles. The cold water made her laugh softly. That laughter was unlike any she had given before. It carried no strain of proving something, no fear of being seen, just pure joy. Ethan watched her, and in his eyes was something more profound than happiness. It was gratitude, because he had almost walked away, almost allowed fear to make his choice, because he once believed loving her meant protecting her from everything, even from himself. But standing here, watching her step across the sand, he understood. Love is not a shield. Love is the hand that holds while the other person walks on their own. Olivia looked toward the horizon where the sun was slowly descending, turning the sea a brilliant shade of gold and amber. "I used to think I had to go back to who I was," she said softly. "To run, to jump, to be perfect again." Ethan listened. "But maybe," she continued, "I don't need to go back. I just need to move forward." He smiled. "One step at a time." She looked at him. "As long as we walk together." They stood there for a long time, until the last light of day slipped beneath the horizon. No paparazzi, no headlines, no cold boardrooms. Just 2 people who once believed they belonged to different worlds. Now, they no longer needed to prove anything, nor did they need to fight, because the most important thing, they had already won. Not shareholder approval, not an untarnished reputation, but the right to choose happiness. When darkness finally settled in, Ethan said softly, "You know what's funny?" Olivia tilted her head. "If I hadn't sat at the wrong table that night, I'd probably still be fixing cars and thinking my life was already decided." She smiled. "And if I hadn't been brave enough to say, 'Would you like to stay?' I'd probably still think I had to hide part of who I am." The ocean wind grew stronger, lifting strands of her hair. Olivia looked down at the footprints in the sand. One hers, one his, side by side. The waves would wash them away, but that didn't matter. because footsteps do not exist only in sand. They exist in the choices we dare to make, in the times we refuse to turn away in fear, in the moment we believe we deserve to be loved unconditionally. Olivia rested her head on Ethan's shoulder. "Life doesn't change because of grand moments," she said softly. "Sometimes it changes direction, just because of a mistaken table." Ethan squeezed her hand. "And because someone chose to stay." The waves continued to break against the shore. The sky darkened, but in that darkness, nothing felt frightening anymore. Only two people standing side by side, knowing that whatever the future might bring, they would keep moving forward. Time passed without noise. There were no more sensational headlines, no cameras lurking outside the garage, no more cold calls from lawyers. Olivia and Ethan's life did not turn into a flawless fairy tale, but it became something far more real. Mornings in Chicago began with the rich smell of coffee and the creaking sound of the garage door rolling up. Ethan returned to his work, still fixing cars, still bending beneath engines, still with specks of oil on his hands. But one thing had changed. In the corner of the garage, there was always a small chair beside the workbench. Olivia would sometimes sit there, reading or sketching. She did not come to supervise or to be protected. She came because she wanted to be there. There was no longer awkwardness between the two worlds. Ethan's friends gradually grew used to seeing Miss Harrington among toolboxes, and eventually they stopped calling her by her last name. She was simply Olivia. As for Richard Harrington, he did not change overnight. Meetings continued, deals were signed, but sometimes he quietly opened his phone and looked at a photo that had never been published in the press. His daughter laughing in the garage backyard, her hair caught in the wind, her eyes no longer carrying the exhaustion of years spent forcing herself to endure. He never said it aloud, but he began to understand. Happiness is not always part of the plan. One autumn afternoon, when leaves began turning along the small street, Olivia slowly stepped from the front door to the sidewalk on her own. No walker, only Ethan standing nearby. She still couldn't walk far. She still needed to pause halfway, but every step was a choice. A neighborhood child ran past, then stopped to look at her. "Are you learning to walk again?" the child asked innocently. Olivia smiled. "Yes, I'm practicing moving forward." The child nodded as if that were the most natural thing in the world. And perhaps it was. None of us walks without having stumbled. We simply fall for different reasons. One evening as they sat on the front steps of their home, Ethan asked, "Do you ever regret it?" Olivia thought. If she had listened to her father, perhaps life would have been calmer, less turbulent, fewer doubtful stares. But would she be sitting here now, listening to the crickets, feeling the warmth of his hand beside hers? "No," she answered. "What about you?" she asked in return. Ethan looked down the street as the lights flickered on. "If I hadn't sat at the wrong table that night, I'd probably still be fine," he said. "But I would never have known how deeply I'm capable of loving." The silence between them was no longer a space to fill. It was peace. Some stories end with a kiss beneath a sunset, but real life does not stop there. There were days Olivia grew tired from physical therapy, days Ethan worried about late repair bills. They argued about small things, which paint color to use for the garage wall, whether to order pizza or cook at home. But never once did they doubt their choice. Because their love was not built on perfection. It was built on a decision made every day to stay. To stay when afraid. To stay when pressure came from outside. To stay when the past tried to pull them backward. One evening, as Olivia looked at the first sketch she had drawn of Ethan, him standing in the rain holding a tire, she suddenly realized something. The drawing was not only about him. It was about the moment she saw someone who did not see her as a burden, and also the moment she stopped seeing herself as one. She turned to Ethan. "Do you know the most important thing you ever gave me?" He raised an eyebrow. "It wasn't that you saved me on the bridge," she said. "It was that you looked at me as if I had never been broken." Ethan was quiet for a few seconds before answering. "Because, in my eyes, you never were." Some words do not change them, the world, but they change the way a person sees themselves, and sometimes that is enough. Life does not always give us what we want, but it always gives us the chance to choose to stay, to keep moving, to believe we deserve happiness. A wrong table may seem like a small mistake in a crowded restaurant, but for two people brave enough to stay after the silence, it can become the beginning of an entire journey. And if this story leaves anything behind, perhaps it is a simple question. When life places an imperfect choice before you, will you turn away, or will you sit down and stay? If you asked Ethan and Olivia which moment changed their lives, they probably wouldn't mention the wedding beneath the golden string lights, not the kiss in the rain on the bridge, not even the first steps on the sand in California. They would speak of something much smaller, a mistaken table, a simple question. Would you like to stay? Life rarely changes with loud explosions. It changes with quiet choices. Ethan could have stood up and said, "I'm at the wrong table." Olivia could have offered a polite smile and waited for the correct date to arrive. But they didn't. They stayed. They stayed when the entire room fell silent. They stayed when the world began to whisper. They stayed when power tried to wedge itself between them. They stayed when fear whispered that letting go would be safer. Their love was not a fairy tale where everything is resolved by magic. Olivia did not wake up suddenly able to rerun marathons. Ethan did not become a millionaire entrepreneur overnight. But they gained something more important. They gained a choice. To love without pity. To walk beside instead of overprotecting. To confront instead of avoid. There is a vast difference between saving someone and believing they can stand on their own. Ethan learned that on the bridge in the rain. Olivia learned that when she walked toward him on their wedding day. And perhaps each of us is learning that in our own way. Because not everyone sits in a wheelchair after an accident, but all of us have carried an invisible chair at some point. A fear, a past, a label placed on us by others. The question is not whether you have flaws. The question is whether you believe you deserve to be seen beyond them. Olivia once believed she had to hide her most fragile parts to be loved. Ethan once believed he had to walk away to protect the person he loved. They were both wrong. Love does not require perfection. It only requires honesty. You may never sit at the wrong table in a luxury restaurant, but you will face moments when things do not go according to plan. A job that isn't what you expected, a relationship that doesn't fit by other people's standards, a decision that invites doubt. And when that moment comes, what will you do? Will you stand up and apologize for sitting in the wrong place? Or will you stay a little longer and listen to your heart? Because sometimes what we call a mistake is simply the shortest path to what is right. Ethan and Olivia did not conquer the world. They did not change social structures. They did not rewrite the rules of power. They did something far simpler. They chose each other. And in a world where everything can be calculated, choosing someone without expecting benefit in return, it is an act of courage. One quiet night, Olivia once whispered to Ethan, "I don't need a perfect person. I just need someone who won't leave when things get hard." And Ethan replied, "I don't need the world to accept me. I just need you to stay." Perhaps that is what we are truly searching for in this life. Not perfection, no approval, but someone is willing to stay. If this story touched you, if somewhere in your heart there is a memory, a choice, a person you once almost let go, take a moment to think. Maybe it's not too late to sit back down. Maybe the table you thought you chose by mistake, it is the place where you are most clearly seen. Thank you for walking through this journey with me. If Ethan and Olivia's story made you believe a little more in the gentleness of life, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Press like if you believe love doesn't need to be perfect. Leave a comment if you've ever sat at the wrong table and found something right. And subscribe to Deep Life Tales so we can continue telling stories that slow the heart and remind us that kindness, courage, and true love still exist, even in the most ordinary moments. Because sometimes the richest story, it's not about money. It is about the person who chose to stay.